Welcome to Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Hi everyone, my name is Claire and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. Here, I make content about what it is like to live as an adult on the autism spectrum and whatever else feels good to me. So if that sounds good to you, or if you're feeling particularly gracious today, and I hope that you are, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, ring the bell. I almost forgot to mention that I put out videos a few times a week, so click the like and the share. Help out your good friend Claire. Everyone, welcome to one of my favorite things, the podcast, Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Today we have a very special guest, YouTube superstar. It's Quinn from Autistic. Welcome.
Hello there, Claire. Thanks for inviting me on. Nice to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Several people have requested your presence here on Autistic People Talking.
Okay.
And I wanted to say welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're connected to the autism community?
I'm one of the old ones in more ways than one. I've actually brought it into the spiel on my videos these days. I was diagnosed 40 years ago, 1984. Before the spectrum was adopted in the early 90s, there were a few thousand people around the world who got speculative diagnoses, and I was one of them. And I grew up in a world that knew nothing about what autism was, and I kept quiet about it for most of the time. A few years ago, I had a personal crisis which revolved around me being autistic, and I started the channel really because I didn't see anything else out there that fitted into the kind of category I was looking for. I don't approach being autistic so much from the neurological angle, from the hard science angle, more from the soft sciences. I want to understand why it is that we don't always click with people, why people think odd things about us. How do they get these weird impressions about who we are when we know inside we're not what they think we are? What is it about our behaviors, everything? And so I started talking about that. It took me 18 months to get my first 1,000 subscribers. It took me 4 years more to get up to 10,000. And then in the last year, it's just skyrocketed. I don't know what's happened, but there's an awful lot more people watching my videos now, which is good for me. But from my own personal point of view, because I feel that there's a message that I'm trying to put out there, I'm just glad there's more people getting that message more than anything else.
I don't want to squash what you're saying, but I'm almost at 4 years on my channel. So what you're saying is growth is just around the corner.
Well, yes, it is. That's the thing. I mean, I can remember myself a couple of years ago approaching another autistic YouTuber who had a bigger channel, and just saying, well, how did you stimulate that growth? And they said the same to me. I don't know. It just started rolling. And for me, it was, I know that one of the catalysts was a particular video. I did one called The Great Neurotypical Swindle. Is a pun on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, the Sex Pistols album and movie. And it's one of those that most people found it very good, but some people got the wrong end of the stick. It was simply talking about the illusion that we have of neurotypical life being better than ours. That, if only I was neurotypical, I'd have more friends, I'd have a better job, people wouldn't take the mickey out of me, I'd be popular. Or it's an illusion. Neurotypical life is no less complicated than ours. They've just got a whole different set of complications. And that's all I was trying to say in that one. But for some reason, it caught on. And I think that's still my most popular one. But that gave me a huge boost. And then about a year ago, it just started rolling. And I never expected it to grow as fast as it has, to be quite honest. I started this year on about 10,000 subscribers thinking, right, if I can double that by the end of the year, I'll have done really well. And I've already gone way beyond that. So yes, it is just around the corner for you, Claire, because you're doing quality work. I haven't
That's
seen
nice.
all your stuff yet, but what you do is very, very good. It's high quality, and it is true that if you keep at it, you keep producing quality work, it will happen. But it
Well,
sometimes takes a bloody long time.
yeah,
It's
I've
whether or not you can
decided to
stick it
just
out.
keep at it. That's
Mm,
that's my decision. I think, and I've talked about this before, and we don't have to talk about this for long because everyone's heard me talk about I'm like a nerd about YouTube stuff.
yeah.
Uh, I've it what it has taught me is a lot of patience, and it has
Mm,
redefined my, uh what does success look like for me.
yeah.
And actually, I've been able to look at it as a really good thing because I think that if my channel had grown very quickly, and just knowing how I handle all of it now, I don't think I would have been ready for that, and I think burnout would have happened very quickly.
Mm,
And for now, I've been able to semi-successfully stave that off. Is stave the word I'm looking for?
yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, so yes, thank you for letting me talk about that for a second, but I just found that interesting that you said that. Um, as far as your diagnosis, if you're okay with us talking about
Mhm,
that a little bit, I did notice watching some of your videos, you mentioned that you were diagnosed almost
mhm.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
What led to that diagnosis, and what was it called at the time? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually did a video on this a couple of weeks ago, because it is a story I've not really told properly in the past. Um, Cut a long story short, I was considered a very naughty boy at school, for the heinous sin of asking questions.
Yeah.
It's a very familiar tale. The amount of people I've spoken to, who have been late diagnosed, who have told similar stories is ridiculous. Every time I tell this, I get people going, "Yep, that's me," or "So similar to me," or the same sort of comments. Um, I went to a selective school, a grammar school. I know grammar school is something different in the US. I think it's like for very young kids, isn't it? Um,
Elementary is, I think, what we call it, elementary
yeah.
school?
Well, a grammar school is a selective school. So you basically you get to age 10 or 11, you take an exam, which is basically like one of those IQ tests that you do online, just as I said in the video, just pages and pages of it. Um, and then if you passed it, you got sent to a grammar school or a technical school.
I see.
Grammar schools, basically, everybody who went to a grammar school was expected to go to university.
Right.
Um, Technical schools, you were expected to go on to a STEM career, and
Mm,
everybody else went to a secondary modern. And yeah, you filled all the rest of the jobs. That was the system as it was back in the early 80s here.
I see. Mhm.
That system's gone now, thankfully. But I was part of that. So I got sent to this grammar school, and lots of expectations were placed on me, but I didn't enjoy it. I
Mhm.
am I didn't know at the time, but I'm autistic. I have a spiky skill set. I'm very good at some things, and I'm utterly hopeless at others. And the school just basically wanted to push me to do better and better in the things that I was good at and to do it competitively.
Mm,
You know, they find a way to make a competition out of anything.
mm,
Um, but they put so much pressure on me for the things that I couldn't do, uh, and not in an encouraging way. It was, what sort of idiot are you that you can be clever in X, Y, Z, but so terrible at ABC?
yeah.
Very, very common thing. Um, I didn't engage with it. I refused to do homework after a while because it was pointless. I wasn't. It was just rehashing stuff that I'd already proved I'd learned in class, and I had other things I wanted to learn. I got told off for asking questions, and they ended up being sent out of class all the time. Long story short, I ended up sent to an educational psychologist, um, employed by the local authority, who spent months and months of fortnightly appointments, occasionally weekly as well, uh, effectively telling me that I was a very naughty boy, and that I really should do what I was told. That was it. This wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't a chance for me to understand what was going on, maybe get something across to the school that, you know, there was a better way of doing it, that I didn't learn the way they wanted me to. But no, it was shoving down authority. So I was given an ultimatum. Um, Basically, go back to school, stop playing up and get on with it. Or the alternative is a boarding school about 300 miles away, which was more or less a borstal, a prison for naughty boys.
Mm,
Um, they sent kids there who had um, behavioral problems, had learning disabilities, but also kids who were destructive. At the time, they weren't making the distinction between a kid who had a literal tantrum and a kid who had a meltdown.
mm.
I didn't like the idea. Um, I came home crying my eyes out. And at that point, my mum, who had kind of let my dad deal with this, stepped up, got involved. And a few weeks later, the psychologist I've been seeing said he'd wash his hands of me because he wasn't getting through to me. But since I had about half a dozen appointments left, I was to be passed on to a young man who just started there. Thankfully, a young man who was relatively recently qualified still was keen on keeping up with everything and had read the right papers.
Yeah.
At the end of that, he explained to me that I was autistic. He explained to me what autism was and how there was a different kind of autism that was being discussed. And he thought that's what I felt fitted into. And what he actually wrote down was autism brackets Asperger type.
Mm, mhm.
That was it for years. Um, then in the early 2000s, um, I was I was living with a former girlfriend over in Wales. She was in the same line of work as me. Um, but my job before I started doing this full time, I worked in the optical industry. Um, she used to work doing the same job as me, dispensing people, and she met a few lads who had Asperger syndrome diagnosis and mentioned to me that they reminded her a lot of me. And so I told her. She was the
Mhm.
first person I told in absolutely years. Um, it did cause a bit of a divide, a
Mm,
wedge. But what she said to me then was, well, look, when I was originally diagnosed, it was experimental criteria. And I'm an adult now as well. It's 20 years on. Why don't you go and get another diagnosis? Which I tried. It was very difficult to get anybody to see me, but I did eventually do so. And yeah, they just came back at that time. This was early 2000s. That was Asperger syndrome was the diagnosis then. So basically, I've been diagnosed twice. Once under experimental criteria, once again under criteria which are actually now no longer valid
mm.
because Asperger's is a dead diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, as I say, I don't know whether anybody really expects me to get it a third time, but I'm quite satisfied that I'm about as autistic as they come now. I
Third
think
time's a
twice is enough.
charm. Third time.
Yeah. But I mean, I am considering going down the diagnostic path again because I have come to realize in the last year or two that I am probably ADHD as well.
Mm,
Um, Having met quite a few people who are diagnosed as both, and having gone through a similar journey to those a lot of autistic people have done that involves what I make, I've been finding the same thing from ADHD creators and realizing that actually what I thought ADHD was isn't quite what it is.
mm,
Again, it's learning about it from the inside. And this is this is something I think which is very um, important to focus on these days. Is that self-diagnosis is possible now. It never used to be, and that's a huge step forward in the world. Nobody would identify with the set of symptoms or traits that we see in the diagnostic manuals. We are diagnosed generally based on behaviors and antisocial behaviors, if we're going to be honest about it. That's what they're looking
yeah.
for.
Yeah.
They're looking for us to do things which would upset the average neurotypical person.
Right. We're known for what people see as like the negative aspects.
Yeah, exactly. And none of us wants to say that about ourselves. We wouldn't want to see that in ourselves. But it is true that, some of the negative stereotypes, they do have a basis in truth, but those bases are not what they're purported to be.
Mm,
When we see it from the inside, when we see it from our perspective, we see that actually there might be reasons for things. We just need to communicate those reasons. When we do communicate those reasons, though, other people come along who have no interest, who just happen to find our video, or they're looking because they're thinking about somebody else, maybe their friend, their kid, their new partner, whatever. And when they hear us talking about what it feels like in here and in here, they relate to that. They don't relate to all the things about meltdowns or poor regulation or bad behavior or executive function, because they're getting on, they're getting by. And as far as they're concerned, their life is no better or worse than anybody else's. Everybody else has got this same shit going on. It's not just me. Beg your pardon. If you want to edit that out or bleep it, by all means do. I'm sorry. But yeah, they've all got the same stuff going on. So, what's there to worry about? But then they see my video or your video or any one of our friends or colleagues that we don't know yet, and they relate to something there. And that's what starts them thinking. That's what starts them down the path. But what they're identifying with is the internal experience and the life events that we often share in common because of the reactions people have to us. They're not identifying with that set of diagnostic criteria. For this reason, I'm, along with a lot of other people, very much of the feeling that the diagnostic criteria either have to change or we have to change our attitude to autism and diagnosis. If the health systems of the world can't cope with the diagnostic demand, perhaps, like we said about homosexuality like 50, 60 years ago, we shouldn't be diagnosing it and just accepting it as part of reality. It's
mm,
people, it's neurodiversity. While we still have a society that tries to put people into individual boxes and say, you're good for that and nothing else, we're not going to move forward. But we have got the potential to make a difference. And the fact that channels like ours are growing and that there is so much more interest is a good thing. We live in a world now where it's all too easy to feel disconnected.
right.
I, one video I did a few months ago, uh, I focused on a particular UK politician in it. Our last Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who at the time was uh, looking towards the end of his time in the office. And I used a particular incident that was in the news at the time to illustrate it. But the point that I was making, as it doesn't matter that it's a specific politician, politicians in general are making people feel a touch of what it's like to be autistic.
Mm,
Because wherever we live, I talk to people all over the world, and it doesn't matter where people live, everybody's frustrated with the societies they live in. They're all complaining that things aren't working, they aren't being done right, that the politicians aren't listening. Why did they make this stupid decision? Well, that's what being autistic is like. But that's everybody. People are saying about politicians, why did they say that stupid thing? Why did they make that bad decision? Why did they tell that easily disprovable lie? Well, that's what we're like with average people all day, every day. To us, our interaction with most people is like that interaction with a politician. Why did that person do that? Why did they treat me that way? Why did they misunderstand me that way? Why did they do that thing which is completely counterproductive? Why did they not let me finish what I was trying to explain and judge me for it? We're doing that all the time, but everyday people are getting a taste of it.
mm,
And I think the more we see that, the more disconnected people feel from the world around them, the more likely they are to find us and look at neurodivergence as a possible explanation.
right.
That doesn't mean that everybody's self-diagnosing now. It just means that people are more likely to find us. But from a personal perspective, I've not met very many people who've got to the point of saying, I'm autistic, who didn't then go on and in some way prove to me that that's absolutely valid, either because they went and got that diagnosis, because an awful lot of people do, because they feel it's validating for them. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't make a difference to me whether you've got it or not. I judge you on my interaction with you.
Right.
But they go and prove it by that, or just by in their interaction, making it very clear to me that, my God, you're so much like me. If you're not autistic, what are you? Um, it's very easy to spot a faker, quite honestly, which is why when I see people who have concerns that people are just diagnosing themselves willy-nilly, I think, well, I think perhaps they're jumping the gun a bit. I think is the phrase. It's not the problem people think it is. Because I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but I've certainly come across plenty of people who I've spoken to who've asked me questions and then gone, "No, I'm not autistic." But they're glad to have come across it, that they've learned something, and it may help them dealing with other people in their lives. But they, they've started thinking they might be, but an awful lot of people do decide, no, I'm not.
I
The,
think
the,
you might talk to more people than me.
I,
I'm not I think I haven't run into it as much, but only because I don't talk to a lot of people, but I can see what you're saying. Yeah, so for me, I was one of those people who saw a TED Talk. I was doing research on autism, and I saw a TED Talk, and I wasn't watching videos on autism in women, it just came across my feed. I watched that video and it was I think I've used the phrase before, like getting hit by a train, not that I know exactly what that's like, but, uh,
hope you never find out.
me too. Uh, it it wasn't something that I ever took lightly. Um, when I heard this person's words and describing their experience, I I think I was a bit in shock because I had just been through probably at that point over a year of like OCD group therapy and getting diagnosed and really working on uh, my obsessive compulsive disorder. And uh, I think that's a long story, but that kind of opened me up to being able to even process autism and that might be something that I was going that applied to me. Um, but yeah, I have rarely met anybody who thought they were on the autism spectrum after doing some research um, and continued with that wasn't. I have found that autistic people are very careful with self-diagnosis, and it's not done especially, if you're I say especially, I'm assuming that if you're an older person trying to get a diagnosis or trying to diagnose yourself, you're not doing it lightly, and it's because of what you've already been through in your life and not just as I don't know, sometimes I get the impression that, people think that, I don't know, like, you're bored and you wanna be more interesting or something, but that's
Yeah.
not really the case at all. I I didn't pursue a diagnosis because I thought it was cool or because I wanted something out of it.
Well, this is where there's such a skewed perception.
Mhm.
Now, autism and autistic people, and for that matter, the existence of autistic adults is perceived differently all over the world.
Yes.
I sometimes hear, I'm not going to point out specific countries, but I do sometimes hear tales from countries that have attitudes to autism that surprise me, in that you would expect it to be a particularly forward thinking place, and it turns out they're not, at least not when it comes to this particular aspect of culture. I am of the opinion that if somebody comes to my channel and identifies with my work, a great deal They find it comforting. They find that it makes a difference to them. Does it really matter whether or not they would
Yeah.
qualify for that piece of paper?
Yeah.
Because I'm not out there to recruit people. I'm not out there to do anything other than just try and help. That's all I want to do. I have been through some horrible times in my life where all I wanted was somebody who could relate to me,
Yeah.
who could say, "Hey, Quinn, I know what you're going through. I've been there." Doesn't matter whether they had some advice or a solution, just to say, "I've been there." If they could have given me a bit of insight as well, some of the hard lessons that I've had to learn to survive all these years, somebody could have told me, I would have jumped at it. Now, if you're out there at the moment and you're lost, you're confused, you don't know why the world has crapped on you from such a great height for all your life, and you find my stuff and it gives you hope, I don't care whether or not you go on to get that piece of paper,
Right.
because it's about helping people feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not you go and label yourself as autistic based on what you've seen on my channel is up to you. But I've not had people tell me that. I've had plenty of people say that I might have been the final piece in the puzzle. I hate saying that because we know all about puzzles and the images that brings to mind. But no, they'll say that you'll be the final piece, or that you've given me more reason to believe, or I now understand that thing. Um, I never get anybody coming in who says, you know what, I was just strolling through YouTube, came across this video and stone the crows, I think I'm autistic now.
Mm.
That's the image people have, though.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the world we live in is very, very competitive and very keen to punish those who are seen to not participate. And unfortunately, that counts for most of us. A lot of us have difficulty participating in the, shall I say, the societal structures that we currently have to cope with. They're not geared up for us. They are geared up for homogeneity and conformity. And that's one thing we're all pretty bad at. We're very good at being individuals. And it's not very often that you find an environment that really rewards individuality. Generally, it's punished.
Right.
That's what we're trying to change. So by getting people to come together and recognize that, even people who, if you like, pass through the autism sphere and realize that no, it's not who they are, they learn more about us along the
Right.
way,
Right.
and they'll be in a better position to deal with the situation more constructively, more maturely, and without causing harm next time they come across somebody like us, because they'll have found something that they relate to.
Mm.
Yes, they're not autistic themselves, but they know that one of those quirks of theirs is very similar to autistic people. They'll have learned to understand us on a better level. And all those tiny little steps take us forward. I just think that it's so important that people like you and myself and all the other autistic creators out there are there doing it, because we are the most grassroots of grassroots movements. Most of us are doing it just because we want to help, not because we expect. I mean, for Christ's sake, there's no money in autistic YouTube. None of us is ever going to be a PewDiePie or anything like that. You know, there are a couple of channels out there that have got a couple of 100,000 subscribers, but you know, they're at the breaking even, just about able to making a living out of it level. None of us is going to get rich out of this. We're doing it because we want to help. We don't want other people to struggle the way that we do, or because in some cases we've got a take on it that we see as different or novel and we want to share it. We want
Right.
to discuss it with like-minded people. But at the end of it, it is just about making the world better for people like us. And the fact that there are so many people doing that, giving of themselves, you know, it's bloody hard work, this.
Yeah.
Christ, I mean, I'm putting 60, 70-hour work weeks now. I never used to do that when I was employed. I used to get up, go to work, come home 8 hours later, and that was it. Now I'm working all hours of the day or night, and in all sorts of different ways and doing different things, but I do it because I want to make a difference. Because for me, my reward is not those subscriber numbers or the revenue or Patreon or anything like that. It's every single message that I get that says
Yeah.
you made a difference.
Yeah.
It's you changed my life, or I feel better about myself, or even just, yes, I now understand what that term means. All those things, that's what matters. That's what the reward is. It's knowing that you've made a difference to somebody. Trying to make a living at it as well isn't easy. I'm not going to deny that, but it's. I was faced with the same choice that you were talking about not long ago. Um, I had a load of crises happen over the space of a few years that haven't let up yet. There's stuff going on that I haven't talked about on the channel. Um, I mean, yeah, because of that, we actually, rearranged this interview a couple of times because of that. I have only really recently fully recovered from the worst burnout I've had.
Yeah.
I struggled for about a year to make videos, and my output was very, very low. I had the choice of carrying on with Autistic or pivoting. I've learned skills. When I started doing this, I knew nothing about video. I just dabbled a little bit and had a go. There's plenty of things I could turn those skills to. I could make a channel that was more commercially viable, that would make me a decent wage straight away because I've got the skills now. I
Mhm.
know what I'm doing,
Right.
but I can't do that because I'm not doing this just for that. I need to be able to say that I'm doing something worthwhile and something useful.
Yeah.
This is, and I can't turn my back on that. I can't turn my back on making a difference. I mean, I like a lot of us, I spent most of my life trying to show that I'm capable of doing something other than what people expect of me. I always wanted to be a writer. That was where my passion was, and I was discouraged from it because well, you're good at sort of sciencey, mathematicy, computery things. Do that. That's where the money is. Yeah, but that's boring. I mean, no offense to anybody who loves it. Just to me, that's boring. I do it for work. It's what occupies me, but it could never stimulate me and interest me that way. But when I accidentally fell into the field of optics, I actually loved that. And what I loved about it was helping people.
Mm.
It's it's somebody coming in who can't see and then going out who can see. It's about the quality of life improvements. And the same way that now I'm a YouTuber, if I'm not doing something that's actually making a positive difference, it doesn't feel worthwhile to me. Now, I know that's just a personal thing. It's not necessarily an autistic thing, despite the fact that I've just said that there are an awful lot of autistic creators out there who, just like me, just want to do something that's worthwhile. As I say, it's whether or not we can keep doing it long enough to build up that audience that allows us to carry on and make it sustainable. There are other ways that we can do that, and that's something that I'll talk to you about off screen at some time. But um, as it stands at the moment, I think there's so much interest, and it's doing good for us as individuals, as channels, but it's doing good for the community as a whole. The more people out there who understand what being autistic means, whether or not they decide they're autistic themselves, the more there are, the better. That can only be good for us and for our future. And if it's good for us, if it brings us all together and more into the fold, it's good for society as a whole.
I
I've,
agree.
I've, I've ranted there. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I it it's easy listening, right? So sometimes when I'm filming the podcast and someone starts talking at length, I forget that I'm supposed to I, because I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say that you didn't have much experience because something I will do when I speak to other YouTubers is go and look at their first video. And I was doing that and I thought, wow, this guy must have a background in uh making videos because I thought that your editing was so good and your writing was so good. So I thought that I mean, how long did that first video take you? Because I thought that you were a professional from the get-go.
Thank you. That actually does feel like a huge compliment from my perspective. Um, I when I started the channel, um, I I'd been watching YouTube for a couple of years. Um, YouTube has always been a place that you'll find information that you don't find elsewhere, particularly if you are a hobbyist of any sort. And you know, I'm autistic. I have special interests that just roll and roll and roll and roll. So I'm always looking to YouTube for information. I was off work for a while and I thought I would dabble with just playing around with video. And I started just making a few videos just for my own amusement. But then um, my personal situation moved on a little bit. And that's when I thought, actually, I want to say something about autism. And whilst I hadn't done anything proper, I'm not trained. I didn't put anything out there. I had made a couple of experimental videos, which were it was just my voice and everything else was graphics and B-roll. They were quite fun, but when I thought about doing an autistic channel, I did think very hard about who my audience was going to be. Is it going to be autistic people? Is it going to be neurotypical people? I set out right from the start to do what I consider, it's an awful word, but outreach.
Mm,
Um, literally, I tried to teach myself um, a sufficient set of skills to work to a standard which I thought would be attractive to not just an autistic audience who are interested in the subject matter, but maybe the internet passers-by. Um, I wanted to present something which looked more like a more professional, more regular YouTube shop window, in the hope that people would come by and learn something. And it works. It does work. I do get a lot of passers-by, but it's keeping them. The autistic people tend to stay. The passers-by tend to just watch the video, maybe leave a like, and then move on. I guess I set myself a high standard because of that. And if I've met that to the extent that you were happy to compliment me that way, then I've succeeded. I personally think that there is value in whatever any of us does. It doesn't matter whether you're sat there with your phone in portrait, just talking off the cuff, or whether you're doing something which is heavily produced like I do, and well, like Mike does on Autistic AF. I mean, he does great videos. Another one as well, a friend of mine that I recently reconnected with, Ember Green, used to have a channel by the name of Ponderful, does amazing autism videos. They're generally very long and incredibly detailed and so well put together. If you think my production's good, look at hers. Absolutely great. Um, there are a lot of us out there trying to produce content from that point of view. We're hoping to pull in people who wouldn't normally watch autism content. But to do that, it is an awful lot of work. And that's why I say, the work weeks I've been doing over the last couple of months have been more than I ever did when I was working full time. And
yeah,
that's because of that very high standard that I set myself.
I'm glad
So,
you brought that up again,
mm,
because when you were saying that the first time, I thought that is so true. And I've mentioned this to my subscribers before. I have to remember that the only thing that people see and the only work that they think that I'm doing is if I put it out onto the internet. And there isn't a direct correlation between the 20-minute video that you see and the amount of work on the back end to do all of that. So if I don't put a video out in a week, but I've spent the entire week editing other things for the future, all people see is that I didn't put out anything for the week. But it's actually so much more work than it looks like. I found it to be very rewarding. So but yes, going into self-employment, business for yourself, doing work, producing videos, that is, I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but I didn't realize how much. Like, even Halloween season is about to come up, and I've been thinking about like what kind of so my channel isn't just about. It was never meant to be like autism channel, which is why the tagline on my thing is autism, etc.
yeah.
Because it's really just about my life as an autistic person. So I was thinking, okay, well, okay, Halloween's coming up. We could do some videos on costumes, and it reminded me. that any video that I do where I'm, like, filming myself doing something, the the thing that you're doing is gonna take 2 to 3 times longer, and then on the back end, you still have to edit that video and put it
Mm,
out. So it's not that it's necessarily always the most difficult work, but it is time consuming.
mm.
It does take a lot, of work behind the scenes. So all of that to say, I do have to remind myself to, like, put out other things, make sure I'm uploading consistently. Otherwise, there wouldn't be yeah, if I don't think about it, then there
Mm.
won't be a lot of content coming out, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know this is not necessarily the focus that all your listeners and viewers normally expect, but this is really quite relevant. That those of us who are trying to do this, it's a much bigger endeavor than any of us realize it is from the start. The reason that I do it, the reason that you do it, you've already said as much, and that of most of the people that I know, the people I would consider friends in this corner of the internet, are all doing it because of that desire to make something good that shifts the world forward.
Mm, mhm.
Now, I know that pretty much everybody in this particular corner that's a sort of my sort of stage or anywhere around it in terms of subscribers and all that kind of thing, we're all worrying about whether or not we'll still be able to do it in a year's time. Because if it's your livelihood, it's not easy.
Right.
Um, but the thing is, we have, I think, an amazing audience out there. The amount of thought and consideration that goes into some of the comments that people leave on our videos, or that they send us in terms of messages, the amount of kindness, the amount of sheer love of humanity that's there, and totally in contradiction to the image people have of us,
Mm,
it never fails to warm my heart. And
amazing.
yeah, it astonishes me sometimes. The kindness that I've been shown by people and that all of us have been shown is really quite something. I think if the neurotypical world really knew exactly how much camaraderie, how much companionship, how much yearning for just being accepted there is within our community, I think they would be astonished. They really would. But that's what I'm trying to communicate. That's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to get that across. We're not scary monsters and super creeps. We are actually just regular people with a few quirks. And if
Mm,
you think about it, Mr. and Mrs. Neurotypical, you've got a lot of those quirks too. Because that is the thing that's so difficult to communicate to people. There is nothing about autism that is unique to autism. Every single character trait that is associated with this and diagnosed can be attributed to something else. And an awful lot of those things are trauma.
mm,
There's a question that keeps on coming up in our circles of how much of what we call autism is trauma and how much is what we're born with. How much do we have in common? Because we've all been through similar kinds of experiences. We've all been treated badly in the same kinds of ways, and we've come to similar conclusions about how to deal with it. Yes, we've got the genetic things at the start. We've got the spiky skill sets. We've got the sensitivities, the emotional differences. But how many of these problems, if you like, that we talk about on a regular basis are down to a commonality in the kind of trauma that we've been through that has led us to defend ourselves in the same way. You said when you meet new people, I sometimes will approach a viewer who's left comments that I'm interested to learn more about their story. There's something novel about it or intriguing, or it might just be something simple like somebody I got talking to recently. It's just the fact that they're Polish. And I happened to work in a place recently where I talked to a lot of neurotypical Polish people, and I'm interested to know about how autism is perceived specifically in that country. So now I've got somebody there that I can talk to and give me a perspective on it. But the feedback I get from everybody I approach has been pretty much in the same spirit that we've been talking about why we do it in the first place. They want people to know their story, and they
Yeah,
want somebody to learn from it. They want to share because they can see that, you know, somebody else will learn from their experience in the same way they wanted to learn from other experiences in the past. I do occasionally do stories that people have told me. Everything I do is always anonymized. Um, Even if you said to me, look, Quinn, it's fine, go on, just say it, say I'm Claire and go into all the gory details, I would say, thanks, but no thanks. I will tell your story, but I'm going to change your name and I'm going to change the circumstances.
right.
Um, just because people do occasionally use things against us unwittingly.
Yeah.
Um, a
Mhm.
bit of information might get picked up and fall into the wrong hands. And I don't want anybody's life story to be weaponized against them because they chose to
Fair.
tell it through
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Um, and some people, I mean, for instance, I mean, what one that was quite popular, I used the name Sky. Um, Now, Sky has watched the video and has read all the comments and has given me feedback on it. And there is another part to their story, which I'll be telling soon. But they don't want to be identified.
Right.
I've got patrons who have asked me, don't put my name up because they don't want to be identified. They don't want their employer to accidentally see something or a friend or a partner because they know there will be consequences if they are revealed as either having a diagnosis or thinking about getting one. These people are taking risks, but they're trusting us to look after them. They're trusting us to have their best interests at heart. And that's, I think, for me, perhaps the most wonderful thing about this community that we've got. On the whole, most autistic people that I've met are very much inclined towards honesty. We do not like being dishonest. We
Mm.
don't like lying. Yeah, most of us are capable of telling a lie if we know why we're supposed to be doing it and we agree with the reasons, we can generally do it. So, yeah, you know, the typical white lie of, you know, not telling somebody what you've got them for Christmas. Yeah, that's not a problem. And even in my work in the past, there have been times where my employer has said to me, we have to be a bit economical about the truth, and this is why. And it's generally been a reason that I can relate to, and I'll go along with it if that's the case. Of course, now and again, we don't go along with it, and that's when we get ourselves into trouble because we ask the questions. Yeah, but this doesn't make any sense. We're just telling a lie. Are we doing this for profit? We shouldn't be doing this for profit. We should only be doing it if it's benefiting somebody. Yeah, bye bye. Thank you very much. I'll take my marching orders and go off and find another job now. We as a people, seem to value honesty and value candor. And when you have that, you develop trust very easily.
Mm, mhm.
Now, we are often criticized for being gullible or being too trusting. And I will agree that, yes, somebody who knows what they're doing can manipulate us that way. But when you know that person is also neurodivergent themselves, particularly if they have the same flavor of neurodivergence as yourself, you see something that you don't see with other people. You see and feel that sense of commonality,
Mm,
of clicking, of knowing what that other person is thinking in a way that you don't normally.
mhm.
Our cognitive empathy is based around learning. That applies to everybody. But where we're at the disadvantage is our assumptions don't normally match neurotypical assumptions. Neurotypical assumptions are going to be based on different things to us. We're often based on raw data, we're based on fact, we're based on true understanding of how somebody is feeling. But if somebody's lying to us about how they feel, we don't necessarily know.
Right.
A lot of the confusion that we get is that the data that we take on board is contradicted by what people say to us. A,
Yes.
a lot a lot of us have very strong affective empathy. We pick up on the vibe in a room very easily.
Yes.
And then we say to somebody, hey, you're obviously nervous. What's wrong? They say, I'm not nervous. No, I'm fine. Everything's great. Yeah, tickety boo. Oh, right. Okay. I got it wrong then. We get signals that somebody's lying, but they try and give us all the reassurance that they're telling us the truth. We're constantly getting contradicted.
Right.
We have we understand something, but we're told that we don't understand it.
Mm,
If we are heavily predicated towards honesty and candor the way we are, and we're dealing with people who are not honest, and they're doing so because they have an agenda which we don't necessarily relate to. Very often, that agenda is related to social exchange. It's related to positions in hierarchies. We tend to sit outside those hierarchies. We're not competing. We're not
correct.
trying to be top dog. They are. We're being honest. We're just trying to, find a reasonable, equitable solution. They're not. Now, I'm not the sort of person who agrees with this kind of, neurotypical hatred thing. The neurotypicals are not out to get us. Simple
Right.
fact is, most of the people that we've had problems with identified as neurotypical. They identified themselves as normal. So we are in the position where most of the people who've treated us badly fit into that category.
Mm, hmm.
But then most of the people who've treated us well fit into the same category. There
Right.
are nasty people. There are nasty autistic people and other neurodivergencies. There are nasty neurotypical people. But most of the nasty people we will meet are neurotypical. So when we talk in terms of neurotypical this, neurotypical that, we're not actually generally talking about the entirety of everybody who is not autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. We're just talking about the ones we have problems with.
Mm,
And quite frankly, a lot of neurotypical people have problems with the same people, but they're better equipped to deal with them. They're better equipped to deal with liars. They're better equipped to deal with the social strategies. We're not. And so we end up very often at the bottom of the pile. What we have at this point in time is an awful lot of people who have got to their 30s, 40s, 50s, or older and realized all of a sudden why it is they were having these difficulties because they're relating to people like us. And from my point of view, it's incredibly important that we have this huge diversity of creators out there of all ages, all social backgrounds, all kinds of education, because we need people to relate to us if they're ever going to move forward. If they're going to have the explanation, the clarity in their lives for why things went this way and not that way, and for that matter, have a chance of moving forward, we have to give them the tools if we've got the opportunity to do so.
right.
That, that, that's my view. This is why I don't do videos that say 10 strategies for this or 5 ways to do that. I really don't like this whole prescriptive way of doing things. I personally believe that we've all got the capacity to work it out for ourselves if we understand what it is we're dealing with. And it's getting that understanding that is the problem. I don't want to tell people what to do. I would much rather give people the understanding and the tools to work out their own solutions because everybody's is going to be different.
Yeah.
Whatever I say has worked for me ain't going to work for you.
Yeah, I agree. That element of self-understanding, I think, is the biggest piece for most uh, neurodiverse people
Mm,
as far as what is therapeutic and helpful for us.
yeah,
And I agree with you that our community sharing stories to the greater community for understanding is so important. I know that for me, why I think you're probably run into it a lot as well, where you hear the, well, why get a diagnosis? Why self diagnose? Why so late in life? For me, the answer is self understanding, understanding
yeah,
of one's condition to be able to understand how to respond in different situations. Where in the past, for example, if I was starting to have a meltdown, or I could feel that I was losing control of my own emotions. It was such a helpless feeling, and I would just be swept away in it. And now, not all the time, but most of the time, I'm better able to understand my feelings in a given moment and to understand what has to do with my autism diagnosis and how I can better react, and now I have the tools to be able to and the vocabulary to share with those around me what I'm going through, and it's, altogether better situation.
Mm,
So this understanding of oneself, to me, that's the biggest message. Having the information has changed my life. And that's the thing that I wanna share with other people. There isn't ever gonna be a big fix, right? Because there's nothing to fix, it's just who we are.
mm,
But being able to say, "This is autism, and this is why I'm experiencing the world in the way that I'm experiencing it," that has changed my life for the better, and I wanna share that with other people.
mm. The understanding is absolutely key to it. It's that feeling of being in the dark is horrible.
Yeah.
I've not experienced it in the same way as other people because I what's astonishing to me from this point of view, I've said that word quite a lot today, haven't I? Astonishing. It's obviously my word of the day. Um, but nonetheless, one of the things that has done that to me is seeing how much common ground I've had with undiagnosed people in my age group, as it were. I, like I say, I was quite open about my diagnosis at first. Um, and then I stopped telling people about it. When I was about 17 or 18, I was in a nightclub. Yes, I used to go into nightclubs when I was underage. A friend who was trying to chat up a girl brought her over to me and said to me, "This is him." What? At the time, um, actually, that must have been 19 because it was 89 the movie came out. Yeah, must have been 19. Anyway, um, the movie Rain Man had just come out. It was quite a big deal all over the world. Dustin Hoffman, everybody won Oscars for it. My friend came up with this girl, said to me, "This is him." She took a box of matches out of her pocket and tipped it on the floor. There's a scene in Rain Man where somebody drops a box of toothpicks on the floor, and Raymond, the central character, just looks at them and instantly counts them. She expected me to do that. It was a party trick, basically. Oh, yeah, he's autistic. He can do that. No, I'd never given my, well, I say friend. It was a friend of a friend, if you like. I'd never given them the impression I could do things like that. They just heard this word autistic related to that.
I'm
But
shocked. I'm thinking about a world in which somebody thinks, "You know what a good idea would be?" I'm a little taken aback by that.
the thing is, it was a novelty. Nobody knew
Yeah.
what it meant. I mean, we live in a world now where when you say autistic, everybody knows what it means, or at least thinks they do. They've got an idea of what it means. Probably not very accurate, as you know, that's why we're here, but they have an idea. Back then, nobody knew anything. So it was just a word. Um, they saw this character, he was identified as autistic. Um, People bring it up an awful lot that the character that Raymond Babbitt was based on wasn't autistic. It was a savant called, I think it was Kim Peek was his name. Um, the decision to make the character is canonically autistic,
Mm, mhm,
but the real person he was based on wasn't.
mhm.
Now, the reasons for doing that were quite political at the time. It was decided that it was something that more people would have heard of and it was more relatable. The unfortunate thing, though, is that from that point onwards, that's what people thought autism looked like. Now, go forward just a couple of years, and in 1992 and then 1994, that's like the WHO ICD, and then a couple of years later in America in the DSM, the autism spectrum was introduced formally. That was based on the same work that I was diagnosed based on years ago, but now it was formalized and it was put onto the books. But you've got the film comes out giving this very specific idea of what autism is. And then a couple of years later, the diagnostic criteria change and Asperger's syndrome diagnoses started coming out. And all those primarily at that time, um, teenage boys and young men who were getting this diagnosis were suddenly being equated with Dustin Hoffman's character Raymond Babbitt. That's what
Yeah.
people expected of them.
Mm.
When I first started meeting other autistic people, it was in the early 90s. It was online. I was one of the very early adopters of the internet over here. I first went online in about 93. Um, it was very difficult to find an ISP back then. And then all of a sudden, AOL were launching over here and there were cover discs on everything. So I met a lot of people through AOL chat rooms, and it was sort of the generic equivalent, Merck, Internet Relay Chat. Merck was a particular piece of software that ran a bit. IRC, Internet Relay Chat, was like the generic cross-platform version of it. So I suppose the forerunners of social media as it is now. This is a topic that I've talked about with a few people. Well, I say a few people, a lot of people over a lot of years, to be quite honest. Going back to those early days, say in the early 2000s, I, I pulled away from the online discourse after a while because it got quite toxic. Um, the what we now call ASPI supremacists, um, they didn't have a name back then, but that kind of um, sentiment was on the rise at the time. But there was a kind of a separatist um, feeling. Yeah, we've spent all our time being told that we're lesser by all these people, but actually, we're all quite clever.
Mm.
My dad owns this company. We're movers and shakers. Yeah, we've got big things ahead of us. Yeah, I'm really clever. I did this, that, I did that. Okay, all right. What we need, what we need, is a place of our own.
Mm.
And then you might come across references to Aspergia, which was going to be the island that they were going to buy. Oh
Whoa.
yes,
Whoa.
they were they were going to get very, very rich and buy an island, and only people like them would be allowed to live there, and it would be paradise. Yeah, right. Sorry, it wouldn't work. Um,
Yeah, some of
we
what you've said so far about
mm,
separatism and the highlighting divides. I am also very against this way of thinking. The
mm,
us and them way of thinking is a very dangerous way of thinking.
yep,
So
absolutely.
um I hear what you're saying. Sometimes when thought processes like that come across my purview in my channel, or I really struggle with that, because I do want to allow people to give their thoughts. However, I find that that kind of thinking is so dangerous,
Mm,
and uh, I hope that when people watch what I have to set forward, they never ever get that from me because what for me, what's most important is we're all stuck on this rock together, and understanding and acceptance of each other and living together is so much more important. So please continue. I just
well, I'm saying it's this is what is so refreshing to hear, though, in what you've just said. That when I talk to other people, that's the sentiment I get. When autistic people talk to me about the world they'd like to live in, there's one thing that comes across so often. I've been talking to another friend about this quite deeply recently. Hierarchy is something that, generally speaking, we don't find works well for us.
mm-hmm.
And the one thing that comes up over and over again is flat structure.
Is
People
what?
want flat structure, as
Okay.
in no hierarchy, no pyramids, nobody at the top, nobody at the bottom, flat structure. Everybody is equal in terms of how they are perceived. That's what most autistic people seem to want. They don't want to be the boss. They don't want to be famous. We don't want to be in charge. We don't want to be remembered for anything. We just want to be able to get on with life, be happy, and just have enough. I rarely meet an autist who has ambitions to be rich or famous. They have ambitions to have a quiet life, to be able to do the things that we enjoy, that bring us pleasure, that inflame our passions, and just be left to get on with it. It doesn't matter about acquisition. It doesn't matter about popularity. Some of us, this is what one of the strange, one of the universals where everybody wants to be loved. But some of us aren't bothered. Some of
Mm,
us aren't really motivated by that, but we are very motivated by other passions. Now, the fact that myself, I'm somebody who's very motivated by love. Um, my wife is the most important person in the world to me by far. And she's made a huge difference to my life. Love is very important to me. But I also talk to people for whom the idea of sharing their home with somebody is anathema. They just couldn't do it.
mm,
But we still relate to each other. I
correct.
understand them and they understand me, and we understand that we're different, but we are the same. And I think if I can do that with so many neurodivergent people who've got such different personalities and different backgrounds and different hang-ups, and we can learn to accommodate each other so I don't trigger you and you don't trigger me, we can do it for the rest of the world. We
Agreed.
just need to get people to know what it. I don't think anybody out there really cares that much about us, to be quite honest, unless they're being told that we're a threat in some way. Most people have got enough to get on with without adding us to the long list of people they're supposed to hate. That it'd be easier if they could just understand us from their point of view. And most people, when they understand, they do just back down. They see us as just being people who think differently, but it's getting that point across. And that's why we need more of us. Like I say, it doesn't matter how old you are, how eloquent you are, just get out there and say it. Tell your point of view. And whether you're getting, hundreds of thousands of views or just a couple of dozen views, if those viewers are interacting with you and they make you feel better about what you're doing and they feel better about it, you've done something worthwhile and
Yeah.
you're worthwhile. You're important. You're just as important as me or anyone else. There are YouTubers out there who are much bigger than me, and there are others who are much smaller than me. And every single one of us is just as important. It's what I mean by flat structure. We all contribute. It's the end goal that matters. It's that future where we're not afraid anymore. It's that
Right.
future where we all have just as much of a chance of getting that promotion or that job or that place on the team as the popular, good-looking people.
Mm,
We're the freaks and weirdos. We're the ones that got shunned. And it's not because we're lesser people like we were taught. It was just because we communicate and think differently. We've got different expectations of life. That
yeah.
double empathy problem is everywhere, blighting our lives. Just get it across to people. Just teach them. Just like we've been teaching for decades that, look, being gay doesn't make you freaky or weird or a pervert or a child molester and all these horrible things that people want to say. You're just normal people who happen to have a different idea of what you want to do in bed. That's it. It doesn't affect me one way or another what anybody does behind closed doors. I really don't care. So why should anybody else care about the way I think and feel? We just need to find a way of communicating with each other. And that just means a little bit of understanding. We need to understand those weird neurotypicals better, and those neurotypicals need to understand us weird neurodivergents better. But once we get that, once we've got past that, we've done the interpreting, we now know how to speak each other's language, we'll have a much better world. I'm never going to stop doing that. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter if I don't make a living out of this. I'll carry on doing this and find another way of making a living because we need to have a better future. I don't have kids, but a lot of my friends do. I want those kids to live in a world that doesn't treat them the way that I was treated or that you were treated or Jen or Mike or any of those other people. We need an enlightened world that understands that neurodiversity isn't just a buzzword. It's not a political concept. It's not the latest thing for you to get annoyed about. It's just a fact of life. Live
Yeah.
with it. Get on with it. End of rant.
What more is there to say? I mean, so much more, but yeah, I mean, so many things that are just resonating with me. One of the things I think about when you say that what most um what most autistic people are looking for is this kind of flat equality across the board. And I think it's interesting that you say that because it's also something that I think comes very naturally to us and also gets us in trouble in real world situations. For example, two I can think of are uh, with teachers growing up, right? You mentioned asking too many questions. One of the things that came to mind was the time in um, middle school or high school English class where I asked the teacher like, "Why are we learning this? What's the point?" And she did not react well.
No,
I think another teacher called in on her phone and she was like, "Do you know what this student just asked me?" Like so rude. Uh, and then also, uh, second situation I can think of where it gets us in trouble is um, in the workplace because we don't see a hierarchy between those who are above us and those who are below us. Um, when we're out in the world, we just see everyone on the same level. And that's not necessarily how the neurotypical world works.
don't
Um,
you know how important I am? That's the attitude, though. That's the thing. It's we don't recognize their self-importance, and that's why they get aggressive.
yeah, and I mean, listen, I can't say that I've never felt self-important before or that I mean, we're all humans, we all struggle with the same things, but in general, I see when I meet other people, I see us on the same level. And it doesn't matter if in some social handbook they're above or below me for some reason. I just try to treat everybody the same, and I'd like them to treat me the same way.
There's a very telling thing in this. The video I just put out was about giftedness, and I said in there how it's okay to display your certificates on the wall and your trophies. It's okay to have letters after your name, but when we start describing ourselves as gifted or exceptional or anything like that, then it doesn't go down well.
Mm, mhm,
Now, I've got quite a few autistic friends who are quite celebrated academics, and none of them ever use their titles or their letters after their name outside of professional circles. So it doesn't, just say if it's John Smith, just pick a random name. John Smith will always be John Smith. He will never be Dr. John Smith.
mm,
He never, ever mentions the doctor, never mentions the letters after his name, except at work, because there it's relevant.
mm,
He
mhm.
doesn't want to lord it over anybody else.
I'd say that before my diagnosis, I would be more apt to tell people about my background. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was trying to live up to this picture of what um, I thought that that was how you would show other people that you were important or
Yeah, exactly.
that what you were saying had worth or to show other people that you were successful. And after my diagnosis now, I I I wouldn't say that any of that part of my life is a secret. I just don't feel the need as much to share. Like that's not what I'm tying my worth to.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what we do, though. This is I do come across some very unpleasant and sometimes very nasty autistic people who take it out on me personally. I've been called a traitor many times,
Interesting.
because I'm a traitor because I don't hate the neurotypicals.
Mm.
There are some of us who have gone down that route. The thing is, I don't. I know it may sound like it right now. I don't look down on anybody who feels that way or who is going through that, because I've been through that. I've been through that when I was younger. There's a point where you turn the self-loathing around on itself. No, it's not me that's at fault. It's them.
Mm.
Actually, I've got it right. I understand it. I see it with clarity. I get this, I get that, I get the other. It all makes sense to me. Now, if only the rest of them would realize that. It's all too easy to take those feelings of inferiority and turn them into superiority.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
There's also exactly what you described there. There's that feeling that we need to prove ourselves. And so we start talking about our achievements because we think, well, maybe people will like us for that, because, we've been trained to believe that people who achieve things, people who are successful, that they're liked, but
Mm.
they're not. We see people paying us lip service and nodding. Oh, that's great. But they bitch about us behind our backs.
Mm.
It doesn't matter what they're like to our faces if behind our backs they're treating us like dirt, or they're saying unpleasant things that undermine us. Of course, there's plenty out there. No, no, nobody ever does that about me, not me. No, no, because I just stop trying to cope with it by making yourself the winner. That we've been Just because we've been treated like dirt doesn't mean that doing it back to other people or treating them with disdain or thinking that you're better than them is going to help.
Yeah.
This world is not going to change that way. That there is never going to be Asperger or some equivalent, whatever. We have to use that word, that Asperger's word. None of us likes using it. We have to acknowledge it. I understand why some people cling on to that because that's the diagnosis they were given, and I'm not going to tell anybody to change that. But it does upset people for good reason, and there's
Yeah.
more evidence that's come out about
When I
Asperger's
use
past.
it, and I view it as a historical term.
Well, it was a blip. Let's be honest. It was a
Yeah.
blip. It was there for about a decade and then it was gone. It was an experiment, a failed experiment. And I had that diagnosis twice, and I'm quite happy to say that Asperger's syndrome was a mistake. It was a stepping stone that got us to where, not where we need to be, but closer to where we need to be. It was important that we had it, but in the long term, it's actually not done us any favors, because
Mm.
that's what people now think. The general public think there's autism. Oh, yes, meltdowns and learning disabilities, and Asperger's. Ah, Sheldon Cooper. The rest of us are in between that. And trying to get that across to people that we are, we're not Rain Man, we're not Sheldon, we're not that lad off that ropey predator movie that solved everything. No, we are not. I was going to say Doogie Howser. No, I'm the Good Doctor. Sorry, this shows my
I
age
got it. I got it.
there. But I mean, Doogie Howser was another character in the same kind of mold. Maybe he was a little bit more socially aware than a lot of us are, but that same kind of idea of the prodigy is something which a lot of us have had to deal with. It's I say often that being autistic is extremes. It's the dichotomy of being both the genius and the fool at the same time, as both being celebrated and vilified at the same time,
Mm.
um, being either really good at things or really bad at things. We're not a people of compromise naturally, but compromise is what we've got to do if we're going to find our place in this world. My mum, she passed away about a year ago. I didn't talk
Sorry.
about it.
Mm.
Okay. I didn't talk about it when she was alive because I don't think it's right to do so. But she identified as autistic herself because of me. And I've no reason to doubt that she was right about that. But there was something she kept on reminding me of when I was a kid. Now, I don't know if it really was, but she put it down to Cliff Richard, who was, well, still is. He's quite, I think he's probably pushing 100 now, probably in his 90s at least. He was a massively popular singer in the UK in the 50s and 60s, and he carried on producing records for years. But he was cited as being the UK's answer to Elvis Presley back in the 50s. He
Okay.
wasn't, but yeah, he was very famous over here, very popular, and he very famously went from being this rebellious teen idol to being a very, very devout Christian. Um, Stopped singing songs about girls and dancing and started singing songs about Jesus. Now, he apparently said at one point when he was asked why he made that change, he said, I used to fight the system until I realized I am part of the system. And I stopped fighting because I'm fighting myself. There is some wisdom in that. We are not going to ever be in a situation where we can't, where we don't have to interact with neurotypical people. So we've got a choice. We either isolate ourselves or we try to make that interaction better, make that world a more pleasant place to live. I don't blame anybody who is angry and resentful and isolates themselves. I don't blame anyone because I've done it.
Yeah.
I think we've all done it. But I've realized that I can reach people. And because of that, I'm using that.
Cool.
You're doing the same. All these people we've been talking about are doing the same. If you've got a skill, if you are lucky enough to know the right sort of people or to have those communication skills that allow you to cross the boundaries and get the point across, use them. You don't have to make YouTube videos. You don't have to write a blog. You don't have to go out and meet people. Just do it in your daily life.
Yeah.
Say it when you do. Just the same way as you would challenge somebody for being racist or being misogynistic, challenge them when they're being anti-neurodiversity or being unpleasant about somebody autistic or just about disability in general. Just stand up and be counted. Say your part, challenge it where you can. If you don't feel up to it or if you're under threat, okay, that's fine. Nobody's under any obligation. But when you've got the opportunity, you feel confident enough to do it, do it. You
Yeah.
keep chipping away, and every little chip eventually will get us to where we need to be. I know I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. I know that the world that I want to see is not going to be here probably for another 100 or 200 years, but I'm willing to do my bit now to lay the foundations for other people to build on. And we will eventually get there. We'll get that world we want, but it's down to us to make it.
I feel the same. I know that it's not going to happen anytime soon, but the more voices, the more autistic voices that are raised, the closer we will get.
Yeah.
So even if what I'm doing is just a small piece, at least it's a piece. That's how I'm feeling.
I'm going to say now that I'm going to have to unusually draw it to a close from this end because I did promise my other half that I would finish by 8 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
I'm telling you the truth here. What you do is very valuable. I haven't seen all your content yet, but I haven't seen any yet that I didn't like. This is me personally just saying, Claire, please carry on doing what you do because I think what you do is valuable
Ditto.
and I want it to carry on. Um, we are making a difference. I have lived through 40 years of watching this because that's when I first became aware of it. And we are in a better place now than we used to be. We're not where I thought we would be. I've realized now that that's a much bigger ambition than I thought, but we have moved on a long way. It's a much better world to live in as an autistic person than it was 40 years ago. I ain't going to be around here in 40 years' time, probably, but I know that it'll be even better then. And it's down to people like us and all those people who watch us, who do their little bit that'll get us there.
Well, I think that's a
Fair
great
enough, the lesson.
place to end it. Yeah, I think it's a great place to end it. Normally, I would have just asked, what would your message be? And you just gave it. So I appreciate that. I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me
Not at all.
in more of a casual setting because your videos are normally more written down and scripted. And it's been neat to get to see this side of you. Um, Thanks for coming on the show and Everyone go check out Quinn's channel, and we'll see you soon. Bye,
Bye bye,
everyone.
great, been great.